As a teacher, what is the most shocking thing you've heard a student say?
I kid you not. I overheard this conversation between some of my high school students. Student 1, did you just hear what he said? Student 2, no, what? Student 1, he said he's going to Hawaii this summer. Student 2, okay. Student 1, this summer. Student 2, I don't get it. Student 1, you can't fly to Hawaii in the summer. The sun is too hot. The plane will blow up. Student 2, I didn't even think about that. Maybe they're going to drive. Student 1, what are you talking about? You can't drive to Hawaii. Do you know how far Hawaii is? It would take forever to get there. Back in the 80s in my hometown, if a teenage girl got pregnant in our high school, she was immediately pulled out of school and they provided her with a home tutor. My mom was one of the tutors. Mostly it was pretty basic. My mom would ignore the girl's condition and the girls did their work. I should add that our town was insanely small, so my mom had known most of these kids since they were in preschool, so I imagine that it was super awkward. During one of these tutoring sessions, one particular girl was prattling on about how she and the baby's father were going to get married, he's going to be a doctor, and they'll be rich in no time. My mom is not one for flights of fancy, she is a firm believer in cold, hard reality, so she couldn't keep quiet. She very calmly explained how much money a baby can cost, then added in the prices of rent, utilities, food, a car and insurance, daycare, college tuition, and books. This girl did not believe her at all. My mom also let her know the failure rate of a teen marriage, as well as the adult rate. This girl obviously had never learned basic household management because she didn't even know how to turn on the stove. My mom never pushed the subject again, and the girl continued her lessons until she delivered the baby. My mom never followed up with the girls, unless the school needed her to. Shortly after that, we moved to a different part of the state and mom took a job with a bank. About 10 years ago, we were at a mall when this woman came over to my mom to say hello. My mom was confused and asked the woman who she was. It was the girl. She wanted to thank my mom for being honest with her about the harsh realities of life and had taken what she said to heart. The girl broke up with the boyfriend who got her pregnant, gave the baby up for adoption, finished high school, went to college, the medical school, and now she's an OB/GYN. She told my mom that no one had ever told her how the world works and how you have to pay for everything. She was kind of embarrassed when she said that she just always assumed that there would be food in the fridge because it had never been empty. Now she was close to 40 and she had gotten married, was pregnant and was finally going to able to give her child the life that she couldn't for her first. She did receive photos of the baby that she placed. My mom just looked baffled because she insisted that she hadn't done anything special.
And after my mom shot him once, my dad laughed at her and said, "That didn't even hurt." So she shot him again. This time he didn't smile so big, oh no he didn't. But damn. He said the same thing the second time, that didn't hurt either, and so she shot him again. He fell down dead and we had to call the police and the ambulance. I was up all night. My mama, she's in jail right now, My uncle drove us kids to school. Y'all got any questions? Because I saw it all.
This third grade student was up in front of the class, laughing, right before the school was to start for the day, telling the story of what went down in his home just a few hours before. I had quickly gone to the teacher's lounge to buy a Diet Coke, teacher's fix, and I came back and passed the classroom where this was happening. I stood in the doorway trying to figure out why this child was standing in front of the class and what he was saying. At the same time I was trying to grasp exactly the importance of what he was saying. When I finally got a grip on the whole thing, I told him to stop talking and sit down. I had an aide watch the class while I got his teacher out of the bathroom and told her to come quickly and bring the principal with her. I rushed to my own class where I had his older brother who was in 5th grade. I was hoping to the universe he was not doing the same thing. There's no way I'd be able to explain that mess to my students' parents should they go home and say something. I found him at his desk with his head down, sleeping. I just couldn't believe the extended family sent the children to school just a few hours after all that happened. But it wasn't over yet. The next night, the mother had been released on bond. The son, who was my student, left his house in the middle of the night and stole a van. Stealing vans was one of his favorite pastimes. The police gave chase. He ran a red light and smashed 80 miles per hour into a small car and killed 3 people. Those 3 people just happened to be friends of mine. This student was just 12 years old. He was placed in jail, not juvie, in protective custody because of his age. A year later, once the district attorney got his ducks lined up in a row so he was sure it would stick, I was subpoenaed to testify in a landmark decision that declared a now 13-year-old an adult so he could be put on trial and sent to prison. Due to his extensive criminal record before this particular event happened, and the fear he induced upon the community, the DA wanted him off the streets longer than the juvenile system would be able to keep him. He received 10 years for each death and was paroled in 2006 according to records I've just been able to find on the internet. I moved far from the city it happened in 8 years ago. I don't have any social media accounts, except Quora, in my real name. In the articles where the mother and her son are interviewed, the son tells non-truths about several things, which is evident when cross-referencing articles, but what does it matter now? The brother, who they speak of in the articles have also been in prison, is the one who was in front of the class telling how his dad was killed. His other 2 siblings also ended up in prison. There's so much more to this, but I can only write what is on record. I have so many stories of shocking statements made by my former students that I could write a book, but I have no desire to. This is just one of many, and writing about each one would make my world a sadder place. All I know is that I did my very best to make their experience at school a happy and educational one. It wasn't an easy job, but I loved teaching school. When my family would ask me about my day, I always had the same answer. You wouldn't believe me if I told you. I taught first grade at a school for students who have behavior and emotional disabilities. Many of the students' parents had terminated their rights, and the kids became wards of the state. They lived in the residential part of the campus and did not have homes to visit on the weekends or during holidays. I occasionally brought my young son to visit the kids on non-school days, and they loved to hold him, play with him, and help him learn to walk. In turn, my son enjoyed all the attention. One day, a student of mine drew a picture of me on the board, and he was so excited to show everyone. "Oh, yes, your drawing looks just like me with the green eyes and yellow hair," I said. Then I looked closely, and there was what looked like a little baby in my tummy. Am I holding my son? Or is that before he was born? And oh, he explained, that's your new baby. My son was only 9 months old and I was still nursing him. New baby? What? I got a blood test on my way home and that night a phone call came from the clinic saying I was pregnant. About 8 months later my daughter was born. So, the fact that one of my first graders told me I was pregnant before I even knew was indeed shocking. I taught this class in religion. It was a small class, less than 10 students. All of them, except one, was Nordic blonde superficial people snickering about others, gossiping about others and worrying about their makeup and hair. And there was Hamid who came to Denmark just a few years ago. He didn't say a word ever, until one day, he spoke. We were talking about religious wars, and the blondes, it's a stereotype and only half of them were blonde, didn't get the seriousness of it all. They were joking, making fun of evil, and finally Hamid said something, for the first and only time ever in class and in perfect Danish. It's because you haven't seen people being killed and watched them die, that you can make that joke. There were no jokes after that, and we all knew, he had seen and watched. Third grade student, my mom got arrested for slapping my sister. Me, oh, my word. I'm so sorry. What happened? Third grade student, my sister found out my mom was sleeping with her boyfriend and she called my mom a whore. Me. Staring in bewilderment. Sister and boyfriend were 15. Mom was not arrested for slapping the girl, she was arrested for suspected statutory rape. Every year, there are a handful of students who think that special classes, the ones that only meet 1 or 2 times per week, don't really count, so they're rude to the teacher and don't try. So rude, in some cases, that the teachers have been known to quit mid-year because of it. These are usually good students. At least, they are manageable. They aren't little monsters or anything, not to the regular teachers. But that's because the parents will get on their case if they give us a hard time, and the grades we give do count. That is, the grades we give are factored into high school placement. The grades the specials teachers give are not. So, every year, I'll be walking down the hallway during my planning period, and hear my students being loud and rude to one of the special teachers. When I ask them about it when I see them later, there's always at least one student who says that. My parents say it's okay, because those aren't real classes. They don't care if I get in trouble. It's not about the grade at that point. It's about being a decent human being to the teacher. Some of the teachers are semi-retired old ladies. It's painful to hear how the students treat them. At the same time, it's rude for other teachers to intervene. If a teacher has to come in and get your class under control for you, it makes it seem like you can't handle them. I used to do that until one of the specials teachers asked me to stop because I was making them look bad. I once heard a medical student saying the following. I heard that if you drop a baby that you're delivering, you should fall to the floor and make like you're having a seizure. That way, you won't get blamed for dropping the baby. Wait, what? Miss, how much is it for a night with you? I had been writing on the board when Jose called this out. Jose was one of 6 seniors in my class. This comment followed several months of students overtly flirting with me, guessing the weight of my various body parts, proposing marriage, but I had laughed off the other instances and tried to divert the attention back to lessons. Jose never seemed to care much about the actual class. The most effort he put in was in trying to hug me. When asked to write an essay, he would jot down the first sentence that came to his mind, "Miss White is my dream come truth," and refuse to add any more. It was my first year teaching. It was my first year in Honduras. I had no idea how to handle anything. But this was a line too far. I went to the principal. I wasn't personally upset, but I knew I needed to address it seriously. And boy, was it taken seriously. Jose was summoned to the second hour of a meeting with all of the teachers in which his fate at our school was to be determined. We sat in a circle as teachers spoke to him about women, about sexual abuse and harassment, about what his words meant and what they expected of him. With tears streaming down his face, he spoke sincerely for perhaps the first time since I had known him. "I'm so sorry, Mississippi." I knew he was. I knew he was still a kid, stumbling over his words as we all have. And he finally got his hug. I was teaching George Orwell's Animal Farm to my sophomore English classes. I asked the students to characterize Farmer Jones. One of them had this answer. Farmer Jones starved his animals. Farmer Jones separated the baby animals from the mother animals. Farmer Jones beat his animals and made them work long hours with no food. The student went on and on listing all the horrible ways that Farmer Jones treated his animals, and in the end, he wrote his conclusion. Farmer Jones was a Jew. When I asked him if he knew any Jews, he said that he'd never met one. When I told him that I was a Jew, he was stunned. When I asked him why he hated the Jews so much even though he never knew one, he said that he'd learned about them from his father. I've never forgotten this. I've seen it repeated with homosexuals and any other group that we think is different from us and might take something away from us that is rightfully ours. We have a president who thinks that Mexicans are rapists, drug dealers, and murderers. I guess our president is Farmer Jones. I was teaching literature to first-year students at the local university. One morning, as I prepared for class, I noticed 2 students sitting in the front row. They both appeared to be around 18 years old. They were early. They were trying to get to know me and included me in their conversation. They told me they were roommates and both had lived with their parents their entire lives until that week. They asked me about the new recreation center, and as I organized my lesson plan and books, I told them all about the center and everything it had to offer, including an Olympic-sized swimming pool. The woman sitting by the door told me she loved to swim. She said she had a pool at home and went swimming every afternoon after class to help her relax. She then turned to her new roommate and asked her roommate if she wanted to go swimming when their classes ended. She pointed out that their schedules were nearly identical and it would be a good way to end the day. The other young woman asked if boys were allowed in the pool. I was a bit distracted, but I told her yes, both men and women use the pool. Then she said, "My parents won't allow me, told me to swim in public pools where boys swim because I can get pregnant." I paused with a book in my hand. I wasn't sure if I misunderstood, or if she was joking. The other young woman started laughing, then stopped. Clearly, her roommate was serious. "It's true," the woman insisted. "The sperm swims out of their swimsuit and through the water. I have never been swimming in a pool with a boy or where boys swim. There were girls at my high school who were pregnant and sometimes they said they didn't know who the father of their baby was, and that's probably because they were swimming. I've never been pregnant because I refused to take swimming classes, so I wouldn't use the same pool as the boys." I tried to keep all expression from my face as I continued to prepare for class. I glanced up a few more times to see if they were laughing at me. Surely she had to be joking. But it became shockingly obvious that she was serious. Other students were coming in the room. The first young woman finally took a deep breath and told her roommate in a soft voice, "I think college will be good for you. You are going to learn a lot here." I was a preschool teacher and athletics instructor for elementary-aged students for 5 years. For me, one of the most shocking things I ever heard a student say came during the end of my teaching career. At the beginning of each school year, I would always ask my classes at the end if they had any questions for me at all, and encourage them to ask me whatever they wanted. Usually, the questions were silly, and/or veiling a secret, anxious fear, like, "How old are you?" or "Do you have a pillow pet?" or, my personal favorite, "What if I need to call my mom to check on her?" But they seemed to serve as a good icebreaker and relax the students, so it was a tradition I continued year after year. This last time, however, a wily, clever girl named Elizabeth's hand shot up. "When you grow up and get married," Elizabeth asked, "are you going to marry a boy or a girl?" Reflexively, my mind immediately began to formulate my standard answer whenever this subject was skirted, which would be a vague rejection that it should come up at all, something about my personal life being private, but the way she had chosen to frame her question gave me pause to consider. It was easy to evade questions about my sexuality or gender presentation, or dismiss them outright, with the standard, one-size-fits-all response, "Not all boys and girls act or talk the same." But she hadn't exactly asked me about that, had she? She had asked a pretty simple question, one that a straight male teacher would answer immediately and confidently, and if I didn't do the same, for a crafty, perceptive one like Elizabeth, that would be answer enough. I took a deep breath. "That's a great question, Elizabeth. As it turns out, I am planning on marrying a boy someday." "Oh, okay, thought so," Elizabeth replied, nodding thoughtfully. And that was it. I waited for them to scream, for someone to burst into tears, for them to erupt into hysterical giggles at the very idea, but they all just sat there, in our circle, looking interested/bored/impatient/ready for free time. Then someone raised their hand and asked if I had a cell phone, and if I did it have Angry Birds on it by chance? When I arrived the next day, I was ready for a horde of angry parents with pitchforks, or at the very least my boss holding up a log of irate phone calls. But nobody had called. Nobody had cared to. In fact, it was never even brought up again, not even by a student. I was truly shocked. Growing up, I always wanted to be a teacher, but just accepted it as established fact that if I were to work with kids, I would have to learn how to hide a part of my life and identity. But the paradigm had shifted, and that was no longer true. The world had changed from the world I grew up in. When and how the change had occurred exactly, I couldn't precisely say, but it was a good reminder that we have the power to really truly erode the injustices and discrimination we may face today, and the results can be felt quicker than you might think too. About 30+ years ago, I used to teach high school in a very small school, K-12 in 2 buildings. One day one of the elementary teachers called me over where they were sitting with a first grader. "Tell Mr. Marler what you want when you grow up and graduate from school," I want to go to jail. The natural question left my lips, why do you want to do that? And he proceeded to tell me that his older brothers had been to jail and had come back telling how wonderful it was there. 3 meals every day, not just sometimes. It was heated during the winter and often air-conditioned during the summer. The toilets always worked and you could shower every day with hot water. You got clean clothes every day. There were no bugs running around, and at night you usually got to watch some TV. Who wouldn't want to have these wonderful things that you can't get at home? Who cares if the price you pay is that you can't leave for months or a year or two and you have to usually work outside in the heat or cold? I knew that people lived in poverty. I myself had lived for a couple of years on less than paycheck to paycheck. But I had never dreamed until that time that jail is a beautiful step up in some people's lives. Mind you, these were not people milking the system. It's not milking the system when at 5 or 6 years old you honestly believe that jail is the promised land. And if he believes it, what will /does his children, etc. believe? High school girl 1, I'm afraid my father and uncles will behead me. A female foreign student. I helped her get a job in another part of the country, away from family. She was worried her husband-to-be in an upcoming family-arranged marriage to a much older man would realize she wasn't a virgin, having been raped by one of her uncles. From calls I got later from the dad looking for her, I'm fairly sure she was telling the truth, about the marriage for sure, and probably the rest. High school girl 2, I failed the math test because I was too tired and upset to study. I sat up all night holding a chair propped under the doorknob because I was afraid my father, a dental surgeon, would come and beat me to death. Last week he built a cinder block wall down the middle of the living room and told us the piano would stay on his side so we wouldn't be allowed to play it. He beats all of us. I helped the mom, who confirmed all this, to get a lawyer, a restraining order and plan their getaway to a shelter. Girl number 2 stopped me in a store about 5 years later and thanked me. She'd graduated from university, avoided any further contact with the dad and was looking for a first accounting job. Girl number 1 not so good. About 4 years later I was called as a character witness in a court case. A boyfriend involved her in credit card fraud. All I could say was she'd been a good student when I knew her and could learn well. She got a suspended sentence, but had met a cop who ferried her to the court. About 3 weeks later I picked up the paper, under an old photo of her as one of their pin-up girls. The story was she was dead, having played drunken Russian roulette with the cop, using his gun. I'm sure you'll be as startled as I was to hear his subsequent penalty was dismissal from the force for improper use of his gun. Whether her problems were all true or not, she could never seem to straighten things out. I teach first grade. We were reading about food and the book said something like, cucumbers and tomatoes have seeds so they are actually a fruit. A student raised his hand and said, did you know boys have seeds inside of them too? All I could think to say back was, thank you for sharing. I used to live in Las Vegas and my ex-husband was a high school English teacher. Students from all over, especially from Mexico, would enroll for school throughout the year. One of his students came at the end of school year when there were finals and she hadn't learned to write in English yet. The students had to write an essay. He told her to just do her best. Well, she ended up writing her paper in Spanish. He didn't speak a word of Spanish, but thought that she did a beautiful job, so he fought for her to get credit for her essay. After he turned in the paper, the school board told him that they couldn't credit her for the work, not because it was written in Spanish, but because it was about, and apparently very detailed, how to give a blow job. Around 1990, I returned to teaching for the first time since pausing to have a family, and found myself teaching primary school children for just one term. I had a class of year 5 children, so, aged about 9 to 10, there were 2 such classes in each year group. During this year, the government of the time suddenly decided that there was to be a national school curriculum in the UK, and one of the things that would be part of this for all primary children was teaching about sex and relationships, so our oldest classes needed to do a lot of catching up on things that would have been taught more gradually if we had known this earlier. It was decided that for the oldest classes, years 5, 6, and 7, it would cause less embarrassment if we taught all the girls in a year group separately from the boys. So one afternoon, all the girls in year 5 were shown an educational videotape, and then I got them all after that for a question and answer session, to mop up any queries and sort out any misconceptions, while the boys were having their showing of the video. The questions came thick and fast, and in the middle of the hubbub, one 10-year-old girl asked me, if a woman has sex with 2 men at the same time, can she get pregnant by both of them? I expressed surprise. What on earth did she mean? Oh, you know, she said. One up the back, one up the front. I put a stopper on that line as quickly as I could, because this was really not an idea I wanted the whole class to get hold of, and fortunately there was so much noise that I doubt if any of the others had actually heard what she said. I said it wasn't the sort of thing we were there to discuss as a class, but asked her to stay behind afterwards so that I could answer her question properly. When the lesson finished, I did answer it, but asked what had given her the idea that such a thing was possible. Oh, she said, just from watching my dad's videos. This was nearly 30 years ago, and I worry about her to this day.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future also. Don't forget to like and subscribe to you never miss a video.